In Sacramento, California, the neighbors on F Street spoke highly of the woman at 1426. She was warm, she was generous, she baked tamales and brought them to people in the neighborhood. She dressed impeccably, always put together, always elegant, with the manner of a woman who had earned her standing through years of good character. She kept her property immaculate. Flowers in the garden, the porch swept, the house always looking cared for and lived in. Her name was Dorothea Puente. She ran a licensed boarding house, catering to the elderly, the disabled, the mentally ill, Sacramento's most vulnerable residents. She took in people the system struggled to place. She managed their paperwork, helped with their medications, cooked for them, looked after them. In November of 1988, police came to that immaculate property with shovels. Beneath the flowers, beneath the carefully tended garden, they found 7 bodies. Welcome to Dark Whispers. I'm Ben. Tonight we are talking about a woman who built a career out of kindness as a disguise, who turned the most trusted social role available to her into a mechanism for murder, and who, as police were literally uncovering bodies from her garden, asked if she could step outside for a moment and was simply allowed to walk away. This is the story of Dorothea Puente. She was born Dorothea Helen Gray on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California, the 6th of 7 children. By the time she was 10, both of her parents were dead. She spent portions of her childhood in an orphanage and with relatives. Early poverty, early instability. The kind of childhood that teaches a person, in the most visceral way, how quickly everything can disappear. Criminologists who have studied her case frequently note this background, not as an explanation and not as an excuse, but as the origin of what appears to have been a lifelong and consuming drive for control, for financial security, and for the kind of social standing she was denied in childhood. Millions of people grow up in poverty and loss without becoming what she became. The background explains the hunger. It does not explain what she chose to feed it with. She married for the first time at approximately 16 years old, a man named Fred McFall. The marriage produced 2 children, both of whom were separated from her custody. It ended within a few years. There would be other marriages, to Axel Johansson, to a man named Roberto Puente, whose surname she kept. Between and around these relationships, reports suggest she engaged in check fraud, forgery, and other financially motivated crimes for years before any of it became a matter of public record. The pattern was visible early. No one was watching closely enough to see it. In 1978, she was convicted for the first time on serious charges. She had been forging checks belonging to elderly people. She received 5 years probation. In 1982, she was convicted again, this time for drugging elderly men and stealing from them, sedating vulnerable people, taking their money. She was sentenced to 5 years in a California state prison. Read that again. In 1982, Dorothea Puente was convicted of drugging elderly victims and robbing them. The specific behavior, the sedation, the financial predation, the targeting of people who could not effectively fight back. That would define her murders a few years later was already on the public record, already prosecuted, already serving time. She served approximately 3 years and was released on parole. The terms of that parole explicitly prohibited her from working with elderly or vulnerable people. Those terms were not meaningfully enforced. Before we get to the boarding house, there is something else you need to know about. Shortly before her 1982 conviction, a woman named Ruth Monroe moved into Puente's home. Monroe was in her 60s. She had recently entered into a financial arrangement with Puente under circumstances that were, at minimum, advantageous to Puente financially. A few weeks after moving in, Ruth Monroe died. The cause was ruled a drug overdose. No charges were filed. The death was not linked to any criminal activity on Puente's part. Investigators who later reviewed the case have speculated that Ruth Monroe was an early, undetected victim, that Puente had killed before the boarding house, had gotten away with it cleanly, and had drawn a lesson from that experience about how easy it was to kill someone in your own home and have it ruled natural causes. Whether that is what happened, we cannot say with certainty. What we can say is that a woman died in Dorothea Puente's home under suspicious circumstances, that the death was accepted without further investigation, and that within a few years Puente had graduated to killing people by the gardenful. Then there is Everson Gilmuth. Gilmuth was an elderly man Puente met through a prison pen pal program while she was serving her sentence. After her release, he moved in with her. In late 1985, he disappeared. A box was found near the Sacramento River Delta in January of 1986 containing dismembered human remains. At the time, the body was unidentified. The case was not connected to Puente. His remains sat in an evidence file for years, while the woman who had put him there obtained a boarding house license, established herself at 1426 F Street, connected herself to the city's social services network, and began receiving referrals. 2 bodies, in 2 different locations, in 1985 and 86, both linked to Puente, neither identified at the time as connected to her, she killed before the boarding house. The boarding house was not a beginning, it was an escalation. By 1986, Dorothea Puente was established at 1426 F Street in Sacramento, a licensed operation connected to the county's referral networks, taking in exactly the tenants she was legally barred from caring for. Social workers visited. Case managers called. The house was clean and orderly, the landlady warm and capable. She dressed elegantly and spoke with the authority of a professional. She was easy to like and easy to trust. The financial mechanism she built was straightforward, if cold. Her tenants, elderly, disabled, mentally ill, alcoholic, received Social Security payments, SSI payments, disability checks. Some she was formally designated to receive on their behalf. Others she simply managed under the guise of helping people who could not handle their own finances. The money flowed to her. When a tenant died, she did not report it. She did not notify the relevant agencies. She continued to cash the checks. A living tenant could leave, could complain, could tell a social worker something was wrong. A dead tenant, buried in the backyard, could not do any of those things. And a dead tenant's check arrived the same as a living one's every month, like clockwork. The murders were, in the most clinical possible terms, a business decision. The method she used was difficult to establish with forensic certainty because the bodies recovered from her garden were in varying states of decomposition. What the evidence did show, in the cases where toxicological analysis was possible, was the presence of prescription sedatives, specifically Dalmane, the brand name for flurazepam, a powerful tranquilizer. This was consistent with her documented 1982 conviction, which had involved exactly this behavior. The prosecution's working theory, supported by the available evidence, was that victims were heavily sedated, given doses sufficient to render them unconscious and incapacitated, and then either smothered or simply allowed to die of overdose. A method that left minimal physical evidence. A method that could, if noticed at all, be explained as a natural death in a house full of elderly and unwell people. She was careful, she was methodical. And she had, through experience, learned what worked. For the digging, she employed a handyman named John Macaulay. She gave him various explanations for why the earth needed turning. Pipes, drainage, landscaping. He dug. She directed. The bodies went in. The flowers went back. 9 victims have been officially identified in connection with Dorothea Puente. I want to name them. Alvaro Montoya, known to everyone who knew him as Bert, was 51 years old. He was developmentally disabled, had limited communication skills, and had been referred to Puente's boarding house through the Volunteers of America program in Sacramento. He was, by Puente's apparent calculation, a low-risk target. He could not clearly articulate what was being done to him. He could not easily be believed if he tried. He had no family who would urgently notice his disappearance. He was wrong on one count. He had Judy Moaz. Leona Carpenter was 78 years old, one of the older residents, precisely the demographic Puente sought out. Her remains were recovered from the yard. James Gallup was 62, a man with health conditions that made him dependent on others. Vera Faye Martin was 64. Her murder was one of the 3 convictions Puente received at trial. Dorothy Miller was 64 as well. Her remains were also found in the garden of a house she had moved into, looking for a safe place to live. Benjamin Fink was 55. He had a history of alcoholism, the sort of background investigators noted that Puente specifically sought out. A man with an addiction history is less likely to be immediately reported missing, less likely to be searched for urgently, less likely to be believed if he reports something wrong. Puente understood this, and she used it. Leona Carpenter, James Gallup, Vera Faye Martin, Dorothy Miller, Benjamin Fink, Alvaro Montoya, all of them in the yard. And Betty Palmer, 78 years old, whose dismembered remains had been found in a box near the Sacramento River Delta in 1986, years before the investigation, years before anyone came with shovels to F Street. Her body was there, unidentified, in a file. While Puente continued receiving tenants and cashing checks and tending her garden, the investigation that finally ended Dorothea Puente's operation did not begin with a detective. It began with a social worker who refused to accept a bad explanation. Judy Moss managed Bert Montoya's case through the Volunteers of America program. When Montoya, who required regular contact and support, who had structured appointments and check-ins, stopped showing up, she went to F Street. Puente told her he had gone to visit relatives in Mexico. Mojas found this implausible. Montoya was developmentally disabled. He had no meaningful family connections in Mexico. He had no history of travel, no ability to navigate something like that independently. The explanation did not fit the person. She escalated. She pushed. She formally reported her concerns to Sacramento police in late October of 1988. Police officers visited the property in early November. They spoke with Puente. She was, as always, warm and cooperative and entirely reassuring. The visit did not immediately produce a search. On November 11, 1988, Sacramento police returned with a search warrant. Almost immediately, officers noticed the yard. Disturbed earth, an odor. They began to dig. Within hours, they found the first body. Over the days that followed, excavations continued. 7 sets of human remains were recovered from the yard of a licensed boarding house, operated by a woman who had baked tamales for her neighbors and received official referrals from the County Social Services Network. 7 people in the garden. Dorothea Puente was present as the digging began. She was not yet formally under arrest. At some point during the excavation, she told investigators she would like to step away to the Royal Viking Hotel on K Street to escape the press that had gathered outside the property. The investigators let her go. She did not go to the Royal Viking Hotel. She walked to a bus stop. She boarded a bus to Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, she checked into a motel under a false name. Over the following days, she went to a bar. She met a man, a retired carpenter named Charles Wilgus. She introduced herself as Dorothea Montalvo. They talked. She was charming and pleasant and presented herself as a perfectly ordinary older woman passing through the city. Wilgus went home and turned on the news. He saw her face on the broadcast. He called the police. On November 17, 1988, 6 days after the bodies started coming out of the garden, Dorothea Puente was taken into custody in Los Angeles. She was calm. She was cooperative. She maintained, as she would continue to maintain for the rest of her life, that she was innocent. The trial was moved to Monterey County because the publicity in Sacramento made an impartial jury there effectively impossible. It ran from early 1993 through August of that year. The prosecution built its case on several pillars: the physical recovery of 7 bodies from the yard, toxicological evidence where available, financial records showing Puente continuing to cash deceased tenants' benefit checks, witnessed testimony from former tenants and social workers, and critically, her prior 1982 conviction, which established a documented history of exactly the behavior under prosecution. On August 26, 1993, the jury returned its verdicts. Guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, Bert Montoya, Vera Faye Martin, and Leona Carpenter. The jury deadlocked on the remaining charges. On December 10, 1993, Dorothea Puente was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. She died in custody on March 27, 2011, at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. She was 82 years old, natural causes. She had spent the intervening years writing letters, giving occasional interviews, and insisting she had never killed anyone. The warm, grandmotherly persona, the baking, the elegance, the charitable self-presentation, never fully dropped. She was playing a character until the end, 7 people in the garden, and she never once publicly acknowledged them. Criminologists and forensic analysts who have studied Dorothea Puente's case place her in a specific and relatively rare category, the caretaker killer. An individual whose crimes are concealed not merely by charm or planning, but by a socially valued institutional role. The boarding house was real, it was licensed, it was woven into official referral networks. The very framework designed to protect vulnerable people was the mechanism she used to access and destroy them. The FBI behavioral classification fits her in the organized, mission-oriented profile with strong elements of what is sometimes called the comfort killer or profit killer typology. The murders appear to have been almost purely instrumental. There is no evidence of sadism, no rage spiral, no psychological escalation of the kind we see in other cases, just the cold arithmetic of a woman who determined that a dead tenant was more financially useful than a live one. This makes her, in some respects, more unsettling than more emotionally expressive killers. There is no psychology to trace, no deteriorating control to study, no mounting pressure that finally broke containment. Just a calculation made over and over about the ongoing value of individual human lives. Her behavior throughout, the fabricated personal history, the maintained innocence, the complete absence of public remorse, is consistent with the antisocial personality profile. She pathologically lied about her age, her background, her history. She presented herself as a person of refinement and community value. She maintained that persona directly over the bodies of her victims. Her prior convictions for forging checks belonging to elderly people, for drugging and robbing elderly men, were on record. She was prohibited from working with vulnerable people. She did it anyway, and the system that had prosecuted her twice did not effectively enforce the conditions that might have stopped what came next. Judy Moise is the person who stopped it, a social worker with a caseload, doing her job, who noticed a client had stopped showing up and found the explanation unconvincing, who escalated when escalating was not the path of least resistance. She is not a dramatic figure in the way detectives and investigators are sometimes made to be in these cases. She did paperwork, she made phone calls, she insisted that someone go look. 7 bodies were in that yard. The number could have been higher. 1978. Convicted of check fraud against elderly victims. Probation. 1982. Convicted of drugging and robbing elderly men. Prison, then parole, then a formal order that she not work with vulnerable people. 1985. Everson Gilmuth disappears. 1986. A box is found in the river delta. A body, unidentified. Ruth Monroe was already dead. 1986 to 1988. A licensed boarding house, an official referral pipeline, flowers in the garden, November 11, 1988, a social worker's persistence, a search warrant, a shovel in the yard. The system failed these people in specific, traceable ways. The parole condition that was not enforced, the bodies that were found and not identified in time, the social workers who accepted explanations that did not add up. The investigators who, on the first visit, found Dorothea Puente cooperative and left, and then one social worker who did not leave, who looked at the explanation and said, "This does not fit the person I know," who kept saying it until someone listened. Dorothea Puente dressed beautifully and baked tamales and tended her garden and spoke warmly to everyone who came to her door. She was exactly what a predator who understands their environment looks like: adapted, embedded, trusted, and operating in plain sight among people whose job it was to protect the vulnerable. She counted on the invisibility of her victims. She was right for years. She was wrong because Judy Moise kept making phone calls. This has been Dark Whispers. I'm Ben, and this is a Dark Whisper Studios production.